You're watching Cheat Sheet Tales, where true stories of love, lies and betrayal come to life. If you're enjoying these videos, don't just watch, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Now let's get into today's story. My name is Clara. I'm 37 years old and I've been married to my husband Greg for almost 15 years now. On the outside, our life probably looked perfect. We lived in a peaceful suburb just outside the city, in a cozy 2-story house with a small garden I loved to tend. Greg worked in finance, often gone for long hours, but he provided. Well, we had 2 beautiful children, both in school, and I worked part-time at the local library. People would often say we were the picture-perfect family, but no one really knows what goes on behind closed doors. Did they? When I first met Greg, I was young and full of dreams. He was charming, funny, confident, everything I thought I needed. And for a while we were happy, but over the years things changed. Greg became distant. He didn't talk to me the way he used to. We stopped sharing the little things, the morning coffee chats, the random texts during the day, the spontaneous kisses. I became more of a fixture in his life than a partner. We weren't fighting, but we weren't connecting either. He came home tired at a dinner and buried himself in work or fell asleep on the couch. I tried to talk to him, I did, but he always brushed it off, said he was stressed or tired or just not in the mood for drama. I didn't realize how lonely I'd become until I started noticing it more. Each day, the silence, the way I'd prepare dinner and wait, hoping he'd notice the effort, the way I'd dress up for our rare outings, and he wouldn't even comment. I started questioning my own worth, wondering if I was invisible in my own home. That's when Ryan came into the picture. He was the neighbor's son, freshly graduated from college, staying with his parents while figuring out his next. Steve was 22, with an easygoing charm and a respectful demeanor. I remember the first time I saw him. It was a Saturday morning and I was out watering the flowers. He waved at me with that bright, sincere smile, and we chatted briefly about the weather plans and how he missed home after being away at school. I thought nothing of it at the time, but over the weeks, our casual greetings turned into longer conversations. I'd see him jogging past our house and wave. He'd stop to Pator Dog Max. He'd offer to help carry groceries when I came back from their store. It was innocent, friendly, even comforting. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. There was one afternoon that stands out in my memory. It was late summer, and the kids were at a sleepover. Greg had left early for a business trip. I was outside pulling weeds when Ryan came over with a pitcher of lemonade his mum had made. He poured us each a glass and sat on the porch steps beside me. We talked about his college experiences, his plans, how he was struggling to find a job in his field. I told him about the library, about the books I loved, and actually listened. Not just nodded politely, but really listened. When I mentioned how lonely I'd been feeling, how invisible I felt sometimes, he didn't judge or offer cliche advice. He just said, "That must be really hard." That small sentence hit me harder than I expected. It felt like someone finally understood. Even if just a little, I found myself opening up more each time we talked. I'd tell myself it was just a friendship, that I was just grateful for someone to talk to. But somewhere deep down, I knew I was walking a fine line. One evening, invited him in for tea. After a walk, the kids were asleep upstairs, and Greg was working late. Again, we sat in the living room, laughing about something silly, and I caught myself looking at him too long. I felt ashamed, confused, but I didn't stop. He was kind, respectful, and I was craving connection. I told him he reminded me of who I used to be, hopeful, full of energy. He said, I reminded him of strength of kindness, of someone who cared deeply, even when no one noticed. It was strange hearing those words from someone so much younger, but it made me feel alive. Still, I knew this wasn't right. I wasn't someone who cheated, wasn't someone who stepped outside her vows. I carried guilt around like a heavy coat, but I couldn't deny the pull. I felt Ryan never made a move, he never said, or did anything inappropriate, but the emotional intimacy was growing, and I felt it. Every time we were near each other, I began looking forward to our conversations, more than I should have. Greg remained distant, and despite a few attempts to reconnect, suggesting a date night planning, a weekend getaway, he always had a reason not to. I was growing tired. I felt like I was the only one trying, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Ryan knocked on the door. His car wouldn't start, and he needed help jump-starting it. I went with him to the driveway, and we worked together to get it going. When it finally roared back to life, he looked at me and said, "You always show up when people need you. Do you ever have someone who shows up for you?" That sentence broke something open in me. I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded, blinking back tears I hadn't even realized were there. He apologized, saying he didn't mean to pry, but it wasn't prying, it was truth. I hadn't had anyone ask me something like that in years. I started journaling my thoughts after that, trying to make sense of my emotions. Was I falling for Ryan? Or was I just desperate for kindness, for attention? Was it his age that drew me in, or the fact that he made me feel seen again? I wasn't sure. I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. I only knew that I was lost in my marriage, and the only person who seemed to notice was a 22-year-old living next door. I tried to create distance. I told myself I'd stop talking to him so much. I'd stay inside, more, avoid the Porsche, avoid temptation. But that's easier said than done when your emotions are already tangled. One day Ryan came over with a small bouquet of wild flowers. "These reminded me of your garden," he said simply. My heart ached. I accepted them, placing them in a vase on the windowsill. I told him we needed to take a step back, that people might start talking. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I respect you, Clara. I don't want to make things harder for you." And yet I still found myself thinking about him, wondering what might have been if I were younger, freer, less tangled in obligations. I felt like I was living two lives. One where I went through the motions as a wife and mother, and one where my heart whispered things I didn't dare admit out loud. The turning point came unexpectedly. Greg came home early one day and found the wildflowers still fresh in the vase. He asked where they came from, and I lied. I said a friend from the library brought them. He nodded, didn't question further, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Suspicion maybe, or guilt. It was hard to tell that night, lying in bed beside Greg. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how we had become strangers. Under the same roof, I wondered if he felt it too. This distance, this silence between us that had grown louder with time, and I wondered what it would take to feel whole again. The following weeks felt like a fog. I couldn't quite step out of after Greg noticed the flowers. Something subtle shifted. He wasn't suddenly attentive or affectionate, but he started watching me more closely. He began asking little questions, where I was going, who I was talking to. It wasn't controlling exactly, but I could feel the tension, like he sensed that something wasn't quite right, but didn't know how to confront it. I, on the other hand, felt like I was carrying a secret, too heavy for my chest. Nothing had happened between Ryan and me. Not really no line chat, being crossed in a physical sense, but emotionally. I'd been walking that line for weeks, maybe longer, and I knew that wasn't fair to Greg, to Ryan, or to myself. Ryan respected the space I asked for. He stopped coming over so often. If we saw each other in passing, he'd wave politely, but the warmth in his eyes had dimmed it, made my chest ache in a way I didn't expect. I missed him. Not just the conversations, but the feeling of being heard, being appreciated. It was like someone had opened a window in a room I didn't even know had been suffocating. Tried to refocus. I threw myself into work at the library, took up new hobbies, even signed up for a yoga class. I told myself I could fix what was broken inside me without dragging anyone else into it, but healing isn't linear. Some days I felt strong and confident, and others I felt like I was one look or one memory away from unraveling again. One Saturday morning, I was returning from the farmer's market when I saw Greg and Ryan's father, Mr. Jensen, talking in the driveway. Ryan was nearby, loading a box into his car. He looked different, more withdrawn. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen him in over a week later. That afternoon, Mrs. Jensen came over with some cookies and mentioned casually that Ryan was moving out soon. He'd found a job in another city, just a few hours away. She said, "He's excited to start fresh." I nodded, smiled, said all the right things, but inside my heart sank. I should have been happy for him. I was happy for him, but it felt like something was being gripped away too soon, before I'd found closure, before I'd found the courage to really face my emotions. That evening, I stood by the window, watching him pack the last of his things. He glanced up and saw me. Our eyes met, and for a moment time stopped. No words, just a shared understanding that something between us was ending before it ever really began. That night I couldn't sleep. Greg was snoring softly beside me, unaware of the storm inside me. I got out of bed, wrapped myself in a robe, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp. I walked quietly down the street until I reached on the Jensen house. Ryan was sitting on the front steps, a duffel bag at his feet. He looked up surprised, but not alarmed. Couldn't. Alarmed. "Sleep?" he asked gently. I shook my head and sat down beside him. The silence between us was different now, more tender, more final. "I heard you're leaving," I said. "Yeah, I got the call 3 days ago. It's a good opportunity. I need a change." I nodded, staring at the ground. "I'm happy for you, Clara," he began, but it cut him off. "I just wanted to say thank you for being kind, for listening, for reminding me that I'm still someone you are," he said firmly. "You're more than you even realize." I smiled, but my eyes stung with unshed tears. "I'm sorry if I made things harder for you." "You didn't," he said. "You made me feel like I mattered too. That's rare." We sat there a few moments longer before I stood up. "Good luck, Ryan," he nodded. "Take care of yourself." Clara, as I walked back home, I felt something shift inside me, not sadness. Not quite. It was like a part of me had closed a door gently. Finally, I knew I had to start doing the work I'd been avoiding, not just in my marriage, but in myself. The next morning, Greg noticed I was quieter than usual. Over breakfast, asked if I was okay. "No," I said, honestly, for the first time in a long time. "I'm not." He put his fork down and looked at me, really looked at me. "Is this about USI?" Nodded. We talked. Not the surface level small talk we'd grown used to, but really talked about the distance, about how we'd let our connection fade. I didn't tell him about Ryan, not in detail, but I told him that I had felt lost and alone, and that someone had reminded me what it felt like to be seen. At first, Greg was silent. then admitted that he'd noticed something had changed, but didn't know how to address it. He confessed he'd been overwhelmed with work, afraid of failing us financially, and in doing so, he'd withdrawn emotionally. We sat at the kitchen table for hours, unraveling years of silence. It wasn't a magical fix. There were no dramatic apologies or sweeping gestures, just two people trying to remember how to be vulnerable with each other again. We agreed to try counseling, to give ourselves a real chance to reconnect, not just for the kids, but for us. I didn't expect instant results, but even agreeing to try felt like a start in the days that followed. I thought about Ryan often, not in a romantic sense, but with gratitude. He had been a mirror, reflecting back the parts of myself I'd forgotten. He reminded me that I was more than just a mother, more than a wife. I was still Clara, a woman who deserved connection, joy, and truth. I began journaling more consistently, using it as a way to process my emotions. I wrote letters to myself, to Greg, even to Ryan, letters I never planned to send. It helped slowly. I started feeling lighter one day while cleaning the kitchen and noticed the vase where Ryan's flowers had been. It was empty now, but I didn't feel that ache anymore. I replaced them with fresh ones from my own garden, bright, colourful, blooming. Greg came home that evening, saw the new flowers, and smiled. "They look beautiful," he said. I smiled back. "Thanks." I thought it was time for something new. Months passed. Life didn't transform overnight, but little by little things began to change. Greg and I attended counseling together, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes reluctantly, but we showed up. We started having real conversations, again about things that mattered, not just the kids, or bills, or schedules, but feelings, dreams, fears. There were hard moments when old wounds reopened, and days when we didn't know if we were making progress or just going in circles. But we kept trying. For me, the biggest shift was learning how to reconnect with myself. I had spent so many years trying to be everything for everyone, wife, mother, daughter, neighbor, that I had forgotten what I liked, what I needed. Started spending more time doing things that brought me peace. Long walks, reading novels that had nothing to do with parenting, painting. Even though I was terrible at it, it wasn't about being perfect. It was about being me. One afternoon, I received a postcard in the email. No return address, just a simple scenic view of a city skyline, and a short message on the back. "I hope you're doing well. Keep blooming." I smiled, holding the card. Gently, I didn't need to respond. I didn't need more than that. It was respectful closure, a small reminder of a connection that had come and gone, leaving me changed. Greg and I weren't the same couple we had once been, but in a way, that was a good thing. The couple we used to be had taken each other for granted now. We were learning how to appreciate what we had, how to rebuild with honesty. Some days were easier than others, but the effort was mutual. Now we both wanted it. One evening, as we sat outside, watching the sun dip below the trees, Greg turned to me and said, "I know I haven't always made you feel loved, but I really want to do better." I reached for his hand. So do I. That moment wasn't cinematic or grand, but it was real. And sometimes real is more powerful than perfect. I still carry the memories of that season in my heart, not with shame, but with humility, because sometimes it takes a fracture to show us where the light can get in. Sometimes it takes an unexpected person to remind us of what we've forgotten about ourselves. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we've been lost and start the slow, steady journey back home. And that's what I've been doing. Coming home to myself, to my marriage, to a life I'm learning to shape with intention, honesty, and grace. It hasn't been easy. but it's been worth it.